not okay to spray synthetic pheromones. I mean, it's not okay to spray PM10, particulate matter of a certain minimum size on people. It's and if you're going to, the people who are going to be, again, paying the cost have the right to a voice in whether that policy is going to happen or not. The central coast of California and the Bay Area is the only place that I have seen that an aerial pesticide spray has ever been stopped. That's just, it was an astonishing achievement. I thought the battle that was going on here was going to be epic and heroic, and surely enough it has been. I mean, the way that citizens on the Central Coast and the Bay Area fought this has been a model that other communities can now look to learn about how to effectively fight. Inside individual cultures, there's always been claims about moral value. You know, inside a French culture, inside Japanese, I mean, they've always had, but never has there been a declaration about moral values that was pretty much agreed upon by almost in the entire human community. That's a new thing. And it's in response to the kind of relativism, what I call ethical relativism, that's pretty common these days. The notion that who's to say what's really right and wrong? Every different group has different ways of believe about what's right and wrong, and because of that, you can't really make claims about right and wrong. What the Universal Declaration does is make claims, and it got agreed upon. And they're claims about very basic right and wrong, very sort of minimal standards of what people can expect from how people can expect to be treated by their government. The Universal Declaration is a declaration and not a formal legal instrument. Conventions and treaties are formal legal instruments, and when the Universal Declaration was first being developed, there was a contingent of folks in there who wanted it to be an operative legal instrument, but they weren't able to convince others. So they ended up with a declaration that was signed by everyone. And then they decided to have the conventions, covenants, treaties, and so on be developed later. Those are formal legal instruments. So there's a International Convention on Civil and Political Rights that was developed and signed and adopted within a few years after that.
What year was this?
The Universal Declaration is 1948. We just had the 60th anniversary on December 10th, 2008. And then the conventions on civil and political rights, economic and cultural rights came later, a few years later. Mm-hmm. So, and those are legal instruments.
They are?
They're legal instruments, yes, that have the force of international law. Now, they don't have the force of domestic law within a country until that country ratifies that instrument in their own country. And the United States doesn't have a strong history of ratifying human rights conventions. They did sign the Universal Declaration, and the U.S. has ratified the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, but we have not ratified the Convention on cultural, economic, social, and cultural rights. We have not ratified Convention on the Rights of the Child, on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. There's lots of rights, human rights instruments that the U.S. has not yet ratified.
But other countries have?
Oh, most other countries have, yes.
So just to be clear, what are the two covenants?
The International Convention on Civil and Political Rights and the International Convention on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights. And those three documents, the Universal Declaration and those two conventions, are said to be the International Bill of Rights. So they're the three main instruments.
So now you were saying that even though these don't have the force of domestic law,
Except for the civil and political rights.
right?
That one does.
Okay, that there's now another evolutionary development, I guess you could frame it that way, in which the environmental movement is melding in some way with the movement for general human rights.
Yeah. So you could say that the International Bill of Rights has moral force, even if it doesn't have legal force in the U.S. It still has a kind of moral authority. And so what the thing that's developing in the environmental world is folks are trying to take to begin to look at human rights, at environmental issues through a human rights lens and apply human rights standards to environmental issues, such as the right to health, for example, or the right to security of person. That's one of the most basic of human rights, or the right to be secure in one's home or secure in one's property, or the right of women and children to special protections, the right of the family to special protections, the right to informed consent. Those are some of the basic principles in these human rights documents that are applicable in environmental situations.
And so how do you see activists beginning to use the idea of inalienable rights?
Yeah, I think there's three possible ways that I think three like tools that can be used. And one is to get a human rights organization to write up a human rights assessment. So you're working on an issue, a spray or a pollution issue of some sort, to get a human rights organization to write an assessment of that situation from a human rights perspective. And as of now, there's only one organization that does that. That's Environment and Human Rights Advisory, an organization that I started. And the LBAM folks do have such a report. And then for that report to be mailed, as it was to CDFA in this case, and so now the citizenry knows that CDFA knows that if they spray, they're violating human rights standards. And there can be a kind of mobilization of shame, I think, that can potentially have some effect. So that's one step that can be taken. A second is to have a citizens' inquiry. And a third is to have a citizens' tribunal. Now those, it'd take a little while to explain each one of those, but and they're explained in much greater detail on, I'm teaching a course, a fully online course on human rights and the environment. And all the course materials are right up on the web, so, you know, if you're not interested in, don't need academic credit for it, you can go learn all this stuff, you know, for free right there on the website. All the lectures are up there, all the documents, everything.
Oh, give us the website.
Environment and Human Rights Course.info. And so one of those lectures lists a whole slew of practical measures that organizations can take when they want to approach it from a human rights perspective. And two of those measures are the citizens' inquiries and citizens' tribunals, and they're both described fully there. In general, the inquiry is to have a commissioners, a panel of commissioners who would hear testimony from citizens who have been impacted in some way, physically or economically, or in some way by exposure to pesticides or whatever the issue is. And the tribunal would be like a court, like a public citizen-based, community-based court that would have volunteer jurists, judges, volunteer attorneys, I mean real judges who know the court system, real attorneys who know the court system, a team of attorneys representing the defendant, in this case it might be CDFA or persons in CDFA, and another team of attorneys representing the claimants, citizens who have been injured, and then that would issue in a verdict of guilty or not guilty. There may be a minority report also, but you'd have a verdict at the end of that.
So, talk a little bit about how it came to be that the CAS folks, or the Stop the Spray folks, contacted you, and you wrote an assessment, I understand.
Yeah.
And then, can you kind of summarize that assessment for us? Tell us the background, and then.
The assessment, I don't remember if they contacted me or I contacted them, but we got in touch with each other. I thought the battle that was going on here was going to be epic and heroic. And surely enough, it has been. I mean, the way that citizens on the Central Coast and the Bay Area fought this has been a model of other communities can now look to learn about how to effectively fight. And so what this human rights assessment does, it was addressed to CDFA, and it says to them that if this spray were to occur, here are a list of 23 human rights standards that may be relevant, and here's the reasons that this standard is relevant: right to security of person. Here's the reason that mothers and children deserve special consideration. Here's the reason that's a relevant issue. Children, for example, are much more vulnerable than adult males, for example. And then after listing these 23 human rights standards, it says it lists some liabilities that CDFA would face if they did violate these human rights norms. And then the final portion is some pathways that CDFA could take to reduce their liabilities if they wanted to do that. There's a handful of steps that CDFA could take. Nothing is safe. Everything has some degree of risk involved. Everything does. Driving your car, anything has risk. The question is, who's going to be bearing the risk? And in a situation like this, like an aerial spray, the community is bearing the risk. So the folks who are bearing the risk, going to be paying the costs with their own bodies, should have a voice, a strong voice, a determinative voice in what the policy is going to be that would make them pay those costs. The Central Coast of California and the Bay Area is the only place that I have seen that an aerial pesticide spray has ever been stopped. That's just, it was an astonishing achievement. It's significant because there are sprays, aerial sprays, going on all over the country, all over the world. And spraying chemicals that are designed to kill things on human beings is just wrong. I like the way someone said it last night. She said, spraying people, it's not okay. It's just not okay. It's like, and you could say, being tortured by your own government, for example. There's a human rights standard that says people have a right to not be tortured by their own government, because torturing people is just not okay. It's not okay to torture people. It's not okay to spray poisons on people.